I noticed that the articles on your site are split into categories, and they're really clear. They say entrepreneurship, newsletters, productivity, social media, and writing. I'm curious, of those buckets, if you were to really teach something today, what would you really love to teach right now?
It's an interesting question because two sort of instinctive answers popped in my head. So the first one that popped into my head was, of those, I would say newsletters, just because I think that's my newsletter is the core of everything that I do. It's the core of my whole business. It's the core of my audience growth. It's the core of everything. So one simple answer to that would be like, all right, well, that's the sort of engine of it all. So let's do that. But the other answer that sort of popped into my head, which is, I guess, kind of a cheat, but I think is actually true. I don't actually see those things as disconnected. I see them as all part of the same thing. So, for example, my newsletter and social media are intertwined. Content that goes in my newsletter goes on social media. Content that goes on social media goes in my newsletter. I don't view them as these sort of separate buckets, right? Both of them are reflective of writing, right? Are an expression of writing. Entrepreneurship, productivity is part of what allows me to publish a newsletter and social media content and write blog posts and do all of this stuff. And all of it is designed in some ways to fuel in my business and the sort of entrepreneurship, right? So the honest answer is, the sort of short, obvious answer is maybe newsletter, but the honest answer is, I actually think it's the connection between all of those things that is not only what I teach, but sort of what is unique, and that I see them all as interrelated. Whereas I think a lot of people don't. They sort of think of them as sort of separate buckets. So yeah, there you go. Two answers. Take your pick.
I always love when people answer with intuitive answers, because it just tells me that this is going to be a great episode, kind of following the flow of where things go. And as you were sharing that, I just came back from visiting my dad in hospital, about 4-hour trip from here, because he had a liver transplant. And what you're sharing is, it makes me think of something that I was thinking of sitting in the hospital about, just how connected the different systems of our body are. Like, you have the systems and then you have the organs within it. And so that really makes sense to me, how it's all connected, and we can't really pull them apart because one thing impacts the other. So in terms of taking a pick, then I think as an overarching concept, we have entrepreneurship/business, because this show is oftentimes for the beginners or people just really looking into that for the first time, maybe not believing that it's for them. I'd love to just start with some definitions. Like, do you see business and entrepreneurship the same? How do you define what you mean by entrepreneurship when you talk about that element?
Sure. So, I think that I don't think business and entrepreneurship are necessarily the same thing. I think entrepreneurship, to me, there's an obvious answer, which, like, entrepreneurship is you own the business versus you work for the business or in the business. But I actually think that you can be an entrepreneur. I actually think it's a mindset and it's an approach that doesn't necessarily mean you own that. You could be an employee and still be entrepreneurial, maybe is a different sort of spin on it. And to me, what I think it means is a feeling, a sense of ownership of what you are doing. And now, in a lot of cases, that means you actually own the business, you own the product, whatever. But it can also mean that you work for a company, but you have ownership of a certain set of responsibilities or projects within that company, right? And you approach it with that mindset that you don't view your job as just someone tells you what to do and you check the box of what they told you to do, right? That you feel ownership and that you feel that it is up to you to figure out that someone might give you a goal, right? Your job is to sell more of these widgets. But within that, it's up to you to figure out how to do that. And I think that's a big difference between that is entrepreneurial, whereas a non-entrepreneurial employee might be like, okay, my job is to sell widgets. Now tell me how you want me to sell widgets, right? Where they sort of abandon that ownership, that agency. And in some cases, it's because they don't feel like they can take ownership of it, which in some cases might be true. In a lot of cases is not. People have more control over how they do their job than they realize. And, you know, but in other cases, in a lot of cases, they don't want that responsibility, right? They don't really want to be entrepreneurial because they're scared, because they lack confidence, because they're afraid that if they swing and miss, they're going to get blamed. And so I think, you know, being entrepreneurial, setting aside sort of just owning your own business, that to me is what kind of entrepreneurship is about. It's wanting to take on that responsibility, wanting to take on that ownership, even if you're not technically the owner. And I'm a huge proponent in that. Again, I had a 20-year career before I went out on my own. So I had 9-to-5 jobs. I worked for big companies. I worked for small companies. You know, I worked for the Oscars for almost a decade. So, you know, I've had a lot of positions, and I've always within those positions been or sought to be pretty entrepreneurial, right? Tell me what you want. Tell me what our goal is. Tell me what you want to have accomplished, and let me go try to figure out how to do that. And that's a mindset that I've had, again, as an employee, and then also out on my own. And I think that's the people that I attract and help and serve. They want that, right? They don't want to just sort of punt on all that, both responsibility, but also opportunity, right? They don't just want someone tell me what to do and I'll do it, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. And if it does work, well, you get the credit. And if it doesn't work, I don't get the blame. You know, it's like they're willing to sort of, you know, there's an inherent risk taking to it to a certain degree. And so, yeah, I think that to me is what it means.
I think the risk reward piece is probably something that exists when you're being entrepreneurial. And I'm excited to ask about your transition from your 9-to-5. But before I do, I have kind of a silly one for you. What the heck is a widget?
I don't even know what a widget is, but it's just a sort of a generic. I always say it feels very like Bugs Bunny Roadrunner cartoon, whatever. But like, it's always my generic when I'm sort of talking about a business that kind of just makes some random product. I always just use widget, right? Instead of like, you know, whatever, plumbing pipes or whatever it is, like whatever. It's just a good sort of catch-all product. Purposefully vague, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm asking that like slightly rhetorically, knowing what the overall concept probably means and what the Google definition would be. But I actually tweeted that somewhat recently because I see that term pop up in business books all the time, and I've never once seen it elaborated on. And I'm like, you know, because what I remember, I think originally like a widget was like a little ball, basically almost like a plastic ball bearing, and then it just like took on a life of its own. And then I see people tweet that like you know, putting someone on building this widget. So I was like, is that something that's a technical term on websites I don't know about or whatever? So at least we're on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. I know for me, one of the reasons why I use it is because I think, and you know, and this is a bigger thing for me, obviously, as a writer and in general, like I'm hyper focused on word choice in general. And I think a lot of people way underestimate every word you use and everything is a choice. And it conveys a lot more than people realize, right? So for example, and I talk about this all the time, like when I'm reviewing people's copy or messaging or whatever, you know, if you say, you know, if you use the example of like, okay, I'm going to call this group of people business women versus entrepreneurs, that means something different, right? Like those are a choice. And a lot of times I'll see people will use the word people, right? So they're like, my newsletter helps people do blah, blah, blah. And the first thing I'll say to them is like, people is a red flag word. So what would you replace people with? Would you replace it with fathers or men or executives or employees or whatever, depending on whatever your niche is? But every single one of those words or choices conveys something different, right? And so it's really important. So to me, like just in that, even though I do it sort of intuitively, like the reason I use the word widget in that context is because if I choose something else that is less vague, that is more specific, it throws people. So like, let's say I said like, oh, okay, if I referenced like a business that was selling, plumbing pipes, there's a certain degree of people that immediately tune out everything else I said, even though I'm just using as an example. But in their mind, they go, plumbing pipes is a certain type of business. I would never have that type of business. That's not it distracts from the point. Right. So using this term widgets, that sort like in this scenario, I don't actually want to be specific because I don't want to distract from the point that I'm making. So that in that scenario, the fact that sort of widgets is a thing that's just a completely generic whatever, they get it. Like, they know enough about it without it sort of distracting them from the main point.
Yeah, I love it. It's almost like a sliding continuum. One of my struggles as a podcaster is like trying to stay in the moment and be a very good listener. I say problems, but I think I'm pretty good at it. I've had a lot of practice. But as you were saying that, it's like I'm trying not to reflect on and drift to make a connection. I'm like, okay, set that connection aside for a second. But I do have a good one. And that's that I've been writing a book recently, and I didn't think about it how you just shared. But a lot of times I was finding myself scratching out specific words to go a little more generic because I was like, people won't see themselves in this story. And whereas if I were creating a landing page for another company or something, I would want to be uber specific in terms of that. You shared the idea of niche. That's one of the main things that I've certainly learned from you. When I took notes from your niche navigator, I think it was called, I remember taking a lot of notes because that was the first time that it was described in a way that I appreciated. Now, I haven't gone back and reviewed my notes, but for those listening to this, I think a lot of people get scared off by that. I know that I have a lot of empathy for the people that get stuck between, am I creating a personal brand that's broad versus am I selling something specific? And that was a pain point of mine, probably unsurprising to you, for many years. So maybe let's talk about that part of trying to build a business, become an entrepreneur. It's such a huge word. We could probably spend the rest of the episode talking about it, but what are some thoughts that you have when it comes to that idea of being broad versus specific?
Sure. So I think that, again, it always depends what you're trying to do, but in general, specific is almost always better than broad. It certainly makes things easier. And so the way I talk about content and businesses and everything is that the first thing you need to figure out is what is the specific value you want to provide and who is the specific audience that you want to provide it to. The more specific, the more clear you are on both of those things. And by the way, most people are not all that clear on it and not all that specific. And then they run into all sorts. What they don't realize is they make everything else becomes harder. The more specific you are about the value you want to provide and who you want to provide it to, everything else becomes easier, right? And so, but what I think happens is, and what I think holds people back is, or one of the big things that hold them back is I talk about this idea of your ideal audience versus your only audience. So people are hesitant to niche down and get more specific because they go, but I like to do this thing and that thing and talk about that thing and this other thing and whatever. And I can help this person and that person and that person. I like helping all those people. I don't want to go narrow because then that means all that other stuff that I can do and want to do all goes away, right? And that is the biggest reason why people are hesitant to niche, and it's completely understandable. But I think this one concept, and when I have that conversation with people, I say to them like, okay, I'm not saying you can't talk about that stuff, help those people, offer that service, do that thing. That's not my point. My question is, I'm not talking about only audience, only product, only content, only thing you talk about. I'm talking about ideal. when I'm talking about niche, I'm talking about who's the ideal person you want to serve. What's the ideal thing you want to talk about? What's the ideal way you want to serve them? And because it's easier for people to answer that. Not always, right? But if I said, okay, let's say someone had a consulting business, right? And they're working with this type of client and that type, 5 different types of clients. And I said, okay, if I could get you 5 more clients that were like any one of those 5 that you already have, but you had to pick one, which would you pick? And usually they'll pick the one that either they most like to work with, most like to serve, or can best serve, right? They're able to answer that. So to me, niches, now let's just make all your messaging and positioning to attract your ideal person, your ideal client, and to offer the product or service or content or whatever you want that's your ideal, right? Because what will happen is they're not going to be the only ones that you attract, and they're not going to be the only ones that you serve, and they're not the only ones you can work with. But if you don't optimize for ideal, you get this watered down vague thing and you wind up getting nothing, right? If you optimize for ideal, you get more of what you really want, and you'll still get other stuff as well. And I think when I have that conversation with people, it usually removes, like I said, the big hesitancy they have is they're like, but I don't want to not do all this other stuff. And once they realize, like, it's not about not doing that stuff. It's about making sure you're aiming for what you want the most of. And I have this exercise that I have people go through that I think they find really helpful and eye-opening. And basically I ask them this question, because sometimes they're not sure, right? They're not sure who their ideal is or what they want. And I say, okay, let's pretend that whatever you have, let's say you're pitching a product or you have a piece of content or your podcast or whatever. If I could get you 100 people to check out your thing who have never heard of you before, who don't know you and are not famous, who do you want in that room? Right? So we can do it right now if you want, just as an exercise, if you're up for it. Like, we'll do it with your podcast, right? So if I said to you, I can get 100 people who have no idea who you are, who have never heard this show, whatever, 100 people to listen to it, who would you want those 100 people to be?
This is going to get very interesting and may provide some tremendous real-time back and forth, because I mean, I think you already know that I've already like almost overthought this. So I'm excited to do the exercise and I will play full out with you. I do have one question quickly though, because I know, and with transparency to listeners, like I am a client and a customer of yours, but I don't even know, which is why I think you do this game really well for yourself, or at least you've learned how to. Who is your ideal customer though?
So it's evolved over the years. And I think that's the other thing that people don't realize is they hesitate to embrace a niche because they think they're stuck. They think it's a lifetime decision, and it's not. Even if you pick the perfect niche for you and it's great and you love it and excited, it's going to evolve. No matter, it will always evolve and will always change, even if you get it quote unquote right? Because you're going to change, and we're interested. Everything's always evolving, right? So that's another thing that people need to get over. Like, when you realize, like, I'm not committing to, I could 6 months from now go, you know what? I'm switching my niche. Like, this is the wrong direction, right? So that, I think, also frees people up, because they feel like they put all this pressure on this decision that, like, oh my God, like, I'm committing the rest of my life to this. So for me right now, I am really focused on helping businesses that want to get more clients from their content, right? So that typically tends to be, again, this is ideal, but not only, tends to be small business types that are already up and running. They have a product, they have a service, they have clients. They're not just starting out from scratch. They're already publishing content somewhere, social media, newsletter, podcast, whatever, right? I'm not in the business of convincing people to publish content. I'm not in the business of trying to help them figure out who they want to work with and that kind of thing. That said, I get lots of people that are like, I'm about to start a newsletter. Again, it's not only, but this is ideal, right? So the 3 questions I ask someone now when they approach me about potentially working with me is, I say, what do you sell? Who is your ideal client? And where do you currently publish content? And so the answers to those questions, if they're able to very clearly and easily go, this is what I sell, I have X, Y, and Z product or service or whatever. My ideal client is this person, and I publish content on LinkedIn and a newsletter. They're probably a good, and they want to get more clients from their content. Like they're a good fit. But there's lots of people I work with that struggle with one or more of those questions. They're just starting out. They're not 100% sure. So it's not that I won't work with those people, but in terms of like my ideal, that is it. Now that is an evolution, right? A year ago, if we were having this conversation, I would have told you my ideal client was, or my ideal audience was experts who want to grow their business, right? And so that's still true. But usually what happens is your niche, you're going sort of narrower and more specific, right? So my current niche is, yeah, it's helping them grow their business, but it's more specifically helping them get clients from their content, right? So that's kind of how I think about it.
Couldn't have went better in terms of a real life example, because I kind of was curious exactly, and you almost read my mind about where it was a year ago versus now, because it was, probably just over a year ago where I really started to appreciate your content, find myself in your sort of creator funnel, and then really think that there are ways that you can help me with, growing my business as an expert, right, at that point. And the fact that that is the case shows like a perfect example of that idea of being able to still attract some customers and work with some people beyond the ideal. So,
and by the way, just I should also add to that. So I made that shift over the past few months, and it's a subtle shift. And I think, again, this is the other thing, like it's an evolution, right? It's not like I threw everything out and said, bye-bye audience. Like, it's an evolution of what I'm doing. But what's interesting is in even just a few months since doing it, I can see the difference. I am attracting different people now. And I can see it, right? I'm attracting the people, and this goes to ideal, right? Once I made that shift, even though it's a subtle one, all my messaging and everything and the content all changed to reflect that shift, to attract the people that I want, right? So my newsletter sign-up page, it's basically the same newsletter, but my newsletter sign-up page used to say a newsletter that helps experts grow their business, and now it says a newsletter that helps you get more clients from your content. And what happens? The people that are signing up for it are people that want clients from their content, are people that match the new description versus people that matched the old description. And so that's the other thing. I think once I've done this for a long time, and with, both for myself and with a lot of different people, but you start to see that like those little decisions, and when you tailor and you have a sort of specific target you're aiming at, well, what do you know? You start getting those people. Right. And so I'm getting people that have more established businesses, right? I'm getting people that are more clear in exactly what they want, as opposed to before I was still getting some of that, but I was more likely the person who's like, I have some expertise and I want to figure out how to turn this into a business and I don't know where to start, which is fine. And I still get some of that, but I was getting more of that then. Whereas now I'm getting more of the people that are like, I've already built a business with this, and now I'm trying to figure out how to take it to the next level. And so that can't happen until you sort of figure out who you're aiming for, right?
And that's a perfect segue back into the game that we can play about figuring out a niche, because I often have ideas about like B2B type things, as in, for example, I will help you publish a book or create a book that helps you organize your ideas and get that out into the world, or creating email newsletter courses is something I've done for companies before, stuff like that. But then on the B2C side of things is where I find more of my personal purpose and motivation. So to the question about if you had the 100 people, I really want to help educate, inspire, and motivate youth. So let's say late high school, early college age, who really aren't sure about what they want to do with their lives, learn from experts about how they can build their own personal brands, build their own businesses, And to your point earlier, that may be a full-time gig, it may be a side hustle, or it may be even within a career, but figuring out the skills required to be more entrepreneurial. Where I get stuck a little bit is that that's pretty clear to me. Like, I would love for this podcast to exist in every school in the world. Building a business around it is a whole different story, it seems, because when I think of, let's say, coaching or creating a consulting practice, I think that people who are much older, demographically speaking, with similar psychographics to where I was 5 years ago, like I might want to do something for myself, are probably the people who would be more ideal paying clients.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. Like you said a bunch of stuff there. And this is the other thing I should point out is that there is no right or wrong to any of this, and there is no one path. Because I think that's the other thing that paralyzes people, right? So you start talking about, especially when it comes to niche, whatever, they go, well, I want to do this, but this seems like it's, business wise, this seems like a stronger idea, whatever. And what happens is they're looking for sort of the one right path, right? And I think when you take a step back and understand that, like, you can succeed with any path, with any audience, with any niche, with anything, right? So the goal is to pick the one you want to go down and then focus on how to make that right, as opposed to looking for the quote unquote right path, right? So even in what you're saying, which is understandable, and I'm not saying not to think about that, but you're saying a version of like, well, this is what I really want to do, but I don't really see it, like, I don't see yet an obvious way that that's a business. The obvious business is over here. So I guess maybe I'll go that route, but I really want to go this route. And you wind up in between and doing nothing and sort of broad and confused, right? Versus, and I'm not saying that you necessarily should do this, but versus going, this is where I want to go. Forget all that other stuff. Maybe it's harder business-wise than the other one. But I'm going to focus on figuring out how to make this work because that's where I want to go, right? Or going the other way and being like, you know what? They're kind of even. This seems like the better one. I'm going to go this way. Forget that other thing, right? Or I'm going to go this way and I'm going to build this business. And then the other thing, helping people, is going to be a sort of secondary result. It's not the sort of, the business is going to be the business. And then this is going to be a sort of secondary project or whatever, which is also fine, right? So, but it's the getting caught in between of, I sort of want to do this, but I sort of feel like I need to do this. And then it gets very convoluted. So the other thing is like, so jumping to the sort of 100 people, like what's interesting is I'll have this conversation. So let's play it out, right? So tell me, 100 people, we're going to introduce them to your podcast. Who are the 100 people?
Yeah. So in that case, it's certainly, I guess I don't have time to list all 100, but the 100 type people, like to kind of use two examples. And I think I kind of said it, blended a little bit there was, hey, I don't have great grades at the end of high school. I could probably get into some college programs. My guidance counselor, my parents, maybe a teacher, are kind of pushing me towards doing that, but it's really not what I want to do. I don't have the grades for it because my ADHD creative type brain isn't really set up for the system that I've been playing in this last 4 years. And I really think I could be an entrepreneur, but I just don't know how. I want to give it a year to give it a go, like a kind of gap year, but to try and figure out if I can build a business, a creator business.
Okay. So here's what I would do. And this is sort of when I do this exercise with people, this is, it starts with that, right? So they give me some, just like you did, some sort of explanation of who they think they would want. Then I'll ask them sort of a series of questions to try to drill down on that. And the answers can be, so I'll give you a simple example, right? So I'd be like, okay, so let's say we have 100 people that fit your description. Do you want 100 men or 100 women, or it doesn't matter? So I'll give them this A, B, or it doesn't matter. And in your case, my guess, I could be wrong, but my guess is you'd go, it doesn't really matter, right? Men or women doesn't really matter. I don't know, but maybe it does.
I agree with that. But what I would say is I think there's a benefit to having a mix throughout genders in that.
Right. But you wouldn't want it. When I say doesn't matter, what I mean is you wouldn't be like, oh, because some people would go, you know what? I really want to, this is about men, right? Or this is about women.
And I could see the reason why both. Yeah. Why you could have an argument for being specific in that case for sure.
Right.
But yeah, I think in my case, it wouldn't matter. Yeah.
Right. So that, so we'd go through a whole series of questions, and some of them it won't matter. And some of them you'd be like, oh, you know what? Like, again, with the ideal context, right? Of like, oh, ideally it would be these people, right? Like, so, another question might be like, is it people that are in college, in community college, not in college, doesn't matter at all? Is it people that come from, is it people that live in cities, or they live in the all the demographic stuff, right? Like just as brain exercises, then you can go into all of the psychographic stuff, right? Is it people who their challenge is they know they want this, but they don't know how to get it? Or is their challenge that they don't know what to do with their life? Right. And you don't have to answer these, but like it's those, you start thinking about all these things. And again, you go, ideal. I can pick 100 people that match whatever set of credentials that I want. Now, what's really interesting is, and I'm just, again, not saying like this is the direction you should go, but I'm just sort of riffing here. So like before you talked about, you're like, oh, your big dream or mission, whatever, would be like, you said something about like, it'd be amazing for it to be in every school. Right. So I might turn around and say to you, so do you want 100 students or do you want 100 school administrators? Maybe if the goal and the vision is to get in schools, the ideal audience is actually the school administrators, because that's going to get you into the schools as opposed to 100 random students. So this is another thing, again, not saying it needs to be that, but this is another trap people fall into, where you're going like, who am I trying to help with the show? But there may be other people that allow you to get to more of the people that you want to help with the show than the people themselves, right?
And I think parents falls into that too. You look at businesses like,
yep,
I forget. There's some like young authors workshops and things along that lines, like art therapy.
Yeah, people
running art therapy type businesses for teens, and like typically they're actually trying to market to parents or youth groups. And
again, there's a million examples, right? What are those people consuming, right? You might say, hey, I want 100 community college students who know they want to become entrepreneurs, don't know how to do it, and are fans of Tony Robbins. Like you can start to get more and more specific in terms of like, this is the person, and it's really just an exercise. It doesn't mean that you're only going to serve people who like Tony Robbins or fit those things, but it helps you sort of drill down on what you want. And, another example, which is why it really needs to start with like, what is your goal? Right. So like I've told this story before, but, I've done a lot of work with comedians in the past, and every comedian would come to me and they'd be like, I need more followers, right? I need more social media followers. I need whatever. And I would always have a conversation with them and be like, forget that for a second. Like, what's your actual goal? Like, what's your career goal? What are you trying to do? Right. And one time a guy said to me, he's like, I want to be on a sitcom. I was like, all right, perfect. So what do you think is going to get you closer to being on a sitcom? Having 10,000 random followers in Ohio, or having 100 casting directors and showrunners following you? Your goal is to get cast on a sitcom. It doesn't matter if you have a 22-year-old in Columbus, Ohio following you. You need the person that can cast you. So that means once you have that goal, that means that person's entire social strategy should be designed to get casting directors and showrunners to follow him, not to post some random video that he hopes goes viral and gets, random people to follow him, right? 10,000 followers is not going to do him anything. Like 100,000 followers isn't, okay, maybe incrementally it helps you, but not really. Like all you need is one casting director or showrunner to go, I got to put that guy in something. Right. And so But you can't get to that strategic part. You can't get to the like, who am I targeting part until you have an idea of what you're actually trying to accomplish, right? So I go to you and I go, oh, maybe 100 school administrators, but that's just coming off of you randomly referencing that like that's your goal. But I think when you figure out roughly sort of what that goal is, now everything else becomes optimized for that, right? And so again, goals can change, and that's why all of this will always evolve. But I think it's a big piece that people miss, right? Like, just because you're making a show designed to help this audience doesn't mean that there's not other people that can help you get to that audience, right? And again, from a business standpoint, like, just because one business model approach seems, I won't even say easier, I would say seems less likely to fail than the way you really want to go, doesn't mean you should go that direction. Because the way you really want to go also has a hidden bonus, which is you're more passionate about it and more excited about it. And that can make up for the perceived greater challenge of going the other route, right? And so I'm a big believer in like, figure out the direction you want to go and go that way and try to figure out how to make it work, as opposed to just what a lot of people do is they look at the landscape and they go, this is the least likely to fail. I'm going to go after the least likely to fail. I like to look at all the options and assume success and go, if I was just as successful with this version as that one, which would I choose? Even if one's easier to hit that mark. Right? Like, look, the truth is I could have gone a lot of different ways. It would be easier for me to sort of have the same level of success that I have. I could write a newsletter that appeals to venture capitalists. I could do the exact same thing I do, but the audience would be way more valuable. But I don't want to do that.
I was about to ask, why don't you want to do that?
Yeah, I go this way, right? So, again, everyone can do whatever they want, but that's my recommendation is sort of aim for the thing that you think you most want and figure out how to make it work. Because the truth is businesses can be built around anything. It'll be a different kind of business, right? But it can be built around anything in a variety of different ways, right? So, it's just figuring out like, there's a lot of different ways. Like if the podcast is the core of the business, there's a million different ways to succeed with the podcast. There's a million different models. They're not easy. Some might be easier than others. None of them are really going to be easy, right? But it's like, it can still be done.
Not easy, but worth it.
Yeah.
When you said that there was a lot of other ways that you could have made business easier on yourself or that there would be maybe more valuable consumers of a different newsletter, I was just literally took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, you could have wrote similar ideas to venture-backed news companies who've just raised seed money or venture capitalists. And then you said it. I'm curious, why in your case do you choose this route for now?
I think it's just where both my interests and my experience are. I've worked for big companies. I've worked for movie studios. I've worked for, the Hollywood Reporter. I've had a lot of different jobs. I've always liked the idea of working for myself. I've always liked, and I've always been a huge believer in using content to attract business. And I built my entire, like I said, at the beginning of this, where I talked about my newsletter is the engine of everything I do. That's a different way of saying my content is the engine of everything that I do. And so I'm good at it. I like doing it. I have a lot of beliefs about how to do that. I believe in sort of providing value through content. And, it's interesting. I've worked in PR, I've worked in marketing, I've worked in journalism, I've worked in social media. So like I've seen all the different angles of this. And all of that sort of feeds into my approach to content. And so, it's a combination of it's what I've done for myself. I know how to do it. I like doing it. I also think in a lot of cases, people aren't great at doing it. and they don't get results, but a lot of times they're not getting results because they're doing it wrong. So one of the things that I see a lot is, years ago, you had to convince people that social media even mattered, right? And that they should even, that those days are done, right? Now everyone's producing content, social media, newsletters, whatever, right? And they're putting a lot of time and effort and resources into it, but they're not actually getting business results. And they're very frustrated. Right. And what I see is I use this analogy of like a wind up toy banging against a wall. Right. So the wind up toy is all the time and effort and resource they're putting into creating content, and they're not going anywhere. And they're just like this over and over again. But the truth is they're not going anywhere because their content strategy is wrong. And my job is I come in and I turn them 45 degrees and say, no, do your content this way. And then they're off and running as long as they want, right? The strategy piece I have found is what most people get wrong, right? So they're like, oh, I post X number of times a day and I use these hashtags and I do blah, 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 blah. And it's like, that's not really content strategy, right? Or they model what they see big successful accounts or celebrities or influencers or whatever doing. And it's like, they're playing a totally different game than you are, right? Or they're chasing vanity metrics. I need more followers. Well, do you, or you need more clients? I need more news. I need, 10,000 newsletter subscribers. Do you? Because you can only work with 20 clients a year. So why do you need 10,000 newsletter subscribers? And those things, those strategic decisions, right? If you're using your newsletter with the goal of getting clients and you only really need or can work with 20 clients a year, your newsletter should be so narrow and so hyper specific. If you have 200 subscribers and 10% of them become clients, you're good. Stop creating a broad newsletter and going, but these people have 5,000 subscribers and I need more. No, you don't. That's not your goal, right? Like they're playing a totally different game. And by the way, that person that has all those subscribers or all those followers, you don't realize that they have an entire staff doing this. You don't realize that they're running ads. I saw someone say this the other day, and it's true. The dirty secret of most huge newsletters is almost all their subscribers come from paid ads. But people don't know that, and they look at it and they go, oh, like, Morning Brew is really popular. My newsletter is just as good. Why doesn't anyone want my newsletter? And it's like, well, are you spending millions of dollars marketing your newsletter? Probably not. Do you have an entire sales team going out and getting sponsors for it? Probably not. Totally different business than what you're doing. And so that, I think all of that stuff, right? The firsthand experience, the understanding and the seeing what I have been able to do with it and clients that I've worked with, and sort of seeing this need that aligns with, my interests and skills, that's why I've chosen to go this route.
Well, it's an inspiring example, and I already knew, but it's like very clear that you have a lot of experience doing this because I think you strike a pretty good balance between being like not a yes person, but maybe being encouraging of the many ways that someone could accomplish business, because a lot of people who are earlier on as a business coach or consultant wouldn't necessarily agree with that or understand that because they haven't seen all the different possibilities versus providing some tough love, and like kind of meeting in the middle. I think you do a pretty good example of that. You mentioned that you really were appreciative of your 9 to 5, that you did it for many years, and that you also, because two things can be true, love kind of working for yourself now. So again, I think a lot of people listening to this are probably way earlier in the journey. I remember what it was like to aspire at all towards solopreneurship, but not even have taken a step yet. When it comes to that whole, it's kind of like a buzz thing, like quit your 9 to 5, go all in on yourself. What wisdom do you have for people wondering about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't recommend, well, I'll tell you sort of how I've done it, and then I guess sort of say what I recommend for people. Every situation's different, obviously. So I graduated college 1997. So no social media, internet's kind of just becoming a thing, totally different world. The idea that you could use the internet or any of this stuff, so it wasn't like I didn't come out of school with the idea of going out to work for myself even really as like an option, right? I had a degree in journalism. I got a job in PR. I moved to Los Angeles and entertainment industry and sort of went from there. But as the internet evolved, my first blog, I think, was in 1999, like really early. Like you couldn't even post. It was on Blogger. There was no YouTube. You couldn't even, in the early days, I couldn't even like embed a photo. So you could just type text and links like crazy, right? No social media, no anything. The idea that like any of it could ever be a business or any of that was just like not a thing, right? So it was just a thing that I just kind of did for fun and was interested in. And for me, again, it was all so new then that to me, I just saw like, oh my God, like I can publish my own stuff. Like that's insane. Like, so it was just fun and a sort of side thing for me. And then over the years, obviously, as things evolved, I was always doing it, and I was always doing sort of side projects, not even businesses, not whatever, but I'd have every 6 months, I'd start a blog, stop a blog, start a newsletter, do whatever, like just sort of playing with all this stuff. Because, basically because I liked it. At the same time, while I had good jobs and I learned a lot and, I would have this pattern, right? Where it's like, I would get a new job. I'd be like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm going to go work for a movie studio and I'm going to work for the Hollywood Reporter and I'm going to do that. Like, this is crazy. And they were really cool. And after 6 months, after a year, I'd be like, kind of over it. And throughout all of it, I never liked literally the 9 to 5 of it. I liked being in control of my own time. I liked, so somewhere in my head, I was always like, the dream would be to work for myself in some capacity. So even though I liked my career and was getting a lot out of it and whatever, like somewhere in the back of my head was like, oh, it'd be really cool to be able to work for myself, even though I didn't know exactly what that might look like. And interestingly, around 2001, 2002, somewhere in there, I was working at the Hollywood Reporter. And one of the things that I realized, and this is one of the great things I think about quote unquote day jobs and 9 to 5 jobs, especially earlier in your career, is you get exposed to all this stuff, right? That if you just go out on your own, you don't. You make connections and network and you learn all these things, right? So I was working at the Hollywood Reporter and I was covering the film industry, specifically a couple different studios, Disney, Paramount, whatever. And so in that job, I was able to have meetings and lunches with people that were running Hollywood. Like literally the heads of the studios once a month, I would have lunch with. So in terms of a learning experience, and I was meeting all these producers because I was covering all their stuff. And what happened in my time working there is I started to realize there were a lot of smart people working in Hollywood and entertainment, whatever. And there were a lot of people that I was like, they don't have anything I don't have. And it was super eye-opening because I started to realize like, I could do what that person does, I think. Like I don't have the experience, whatever, but like, there's a sort of Wizard of Oz, like, right? Like, Emperor has no clothes moment where I'm like, wait a second, like that's all you have to do to be a producer. So suddenly it made me realize like, well, wait, maybe I remember very vividly going like, you know what? I'm on the wrong side of the table in these meetings. I don't want to be interviewing and writing about these people. I want to be one of those people. And so I started to write screenplays. I started to, with a partner, try to like produce some stuff and put projects together and all that kind of stuff. And then eventually though, when I was at the Hollywood Reporter, it'd be a conflict of interest. I can't run around like pitching my screenplays to the people that I'm covering. I could, people do. It's not ethical. I wasn't going to do that. So that combined with like, I don't want to have a 9 to 5, blah, blah, blah. I left with no other job. And was like, I'm going to write screenplays. And I had always been a good writer in a variety of ways and whatever. Screenwriting's really hard. It's the toughest thing. When I left, I had written a screenplay. I was able to get an agent at CAA who was like going to shop it around. Like I was like, but you never know what's going to happen. And so nothing really happened. Got some pitches, got some whatever, but obviously I did not have a screenwriting career that like took off. But the other thing that I realized when I went out on my own was it was always a struggle for me to get myself to sit down and write. And what was interesting was at the same time that I had to kind of, even though I wanted to do this, what I realized in retrospect is I fell in love with the idea of not having a 9 to 5 more so than I did the actual screenwriting. Because what was interesting is what started to happen was I was having to force myself to sit down and work on these screenplays, but I couldn't pull myself away from doing social media and blogging stuff. And I was like, something's not right here. Like maybe I'm not into, again, in retrospect, I realize I like the idea of being a screenwriter more so than I like the actual screenwriting. Whereas with social media, like I love doing the thing. And then after a few months of that and no job and sort of looking around and being like, okay, like, where's money going to come from? A movie studio that I had covered reached out to me and they're like, do you want to come in and freelance as a marketing writer and whatever? And so that sort of took me back into the kind of working world. So what I would recommend to people is I don't actually recommend making the jump like I did without any sort of like, well, I'll figure it out, right? And I think a lot of people do that. A lot of people go like, if I only had the time, right? If I only had the time, then I would write my novel or do my whatever, build my business, whatever. I actually think building it on the side, starting, learning. And so moving forward, I went back into the working world and I was doing more social media stuff and blogging and figuring out how to sell and a little consulting and all that kind of stuff sort of on the side. To then when I eventually left for good, which was in 2016, I was able to take the Oscars as a client. I had worked there full time for almost 6 years, took them as a client, and then was able to get some other clients. And so like and at that point I knew I was going to something that I was already passionately doing on the side and had built up some stuff. So that's my advice is a few things. Number one, there are a lot of advantages to 9 to 5 day job, whatever, early on in your career, money, stability, networking, relationships, all sorts of stuff. Start tinkering on the side, figuring out what you want to do. But yeah, don't be afraid to make the jump eventually. But like, I don't think it's an either or. Like, I'm really glad, again, it was a different time and it wasn't like it was I wonder had I been 22 years old in today, let's say, I don't know that I would have taken a regular job. And I think it would have been a mistake. Like, I think I would have been like, oh, I'll just go, do this internet thing. It's become the fact that I've had a 20-year career in all these quote unquote real jobs before going out on my own is a massive competitive advantage compared to other people who are doing similar things to me or trying to do them that did not have that. I think jobs and I say this as someone who literally all the time was like, I just do not want a day job. I want to go out on my own, but jobs get a bad rap. There's a lot of value early in your career in having them.
I completely agree. And I feel like maybe about 5 years ago, when I started even thinking about going on this journey, and even in the first year thereafter, as I started to learn about a lot of things, read business books, start looking up to creators like yourself and others and learn a lot about it. There was a period in time where I probably would have almost given advice to other people to burn the boats. And I also probably felt like I was one of those people that, if I just had 365 days connected, I could crush this thing. Mm-hmm. In hindsight, because I've been building on the side and I've had opportunities to take, let's say, a month to work full time, I recognize how difficult it can actually be and how much I think it would have negatively impacted my ability to be creative and kind of build things with a solid foundation and right from the first time, instead of having to really go back or really have a lot of regret. For example, I've been working on a book, and the first time I took like a month straight to work on that, I was like, oh, this book will be finished. Yeah, no chance. It was like, it's a lot of work. And is it getting close? Yeah. Am I excited about that finish line? Yeah. But had I just quit work and been like, I'm going to become an author this year, I know I would have regretted it. So I certainly speak.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that people don't talk about enough or don't realize, especially if you're going down the sort of creator route, whatever, is if you don't either have a job or a source of income or money saved or whatever, right? It changes the decisions and the way you have to approach your new thing. So if you go out on your, so for example, right, I didn't have ads in my newsletter until, I don't know, 4 years into it. But if I had gone out, started my newsletter, no income, no money coming in, and suddenly you're like, I need to monetize everything. It forces you to do things in a way that are not in the best interest of your business long term, right? It forces you to, and I can see this, and I wasn't even in a situation where I necessarily needed to, but I can look back and like, there were clients I took on in the early days of going out on my own that I would never take on now, right? And work that I was doing that I didn't really want to do, but I was like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work yet. Like, so I better take what I can get. And I think that's another thing that people miss. Like, it changes the way you operate your business when you need from day one it to really be not only generating revenue, but generating significant revenue. And I think it really hurts people because it hurts how you're perceived. It hurts what you do. It hurts, like it changes, it impacts your decision making because you're no longer thinking about what's best long term for what you're building. You're thinking about what's going to get me money in my pocket that I need to pay rent this month or whatever it is. And people don't think about that, right? And those decisions impact everything, right? They sell a product or a service that maybe they're really not quite ready to deliver on. And maybe people buy it and then they go, this person doesn't really know what they're talking about. And they're never going to buy from you again, right? So there's these hidden costs that come up by decisions that are driven by financial pressure. And starting your business, your creator career, your whatever, with as little financial pressure as possible, really sets you up with the most opportunity to succeed over the long term.
Yeah, making decisions less out of desperation and more out of desire and want as opposed to desperate needs, perhaps.
Yeah.
I know I shared offline before we started that this was one of the episodes that I had to research for the least because, you know, I've been a big fan of your work. I've been a customer as well, so I knew a lot about you. And one of the ways that I like to do things is just jot down overarching themes. You know, I learned that from Tim Ferriss. And, you know, I know with episodes like that as well, you know, we could do Joe Rogan and just sit there all day and take breaks and like talk forever. But, you know, in this case, we won't be able to do that. But before we go into the rapid fire questions, like I just wanted to mention some of the things I jotted down that maybe we didn't tackle too much anyways. But that was, you know, writing, networking and building relationships, productivity, podcasting in your case. And I think teaching as well as being multi-passionate, like all of those sort of headings are things that I think that you really bring to the table in terms of creative wisdom as well. Before we do the rapid fire questions, as I list those different topics, is there anything that like really jumps out that you would like to mention, at least on this edition of us working together?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if it popped in my head because I think it was one of the first one you said would be writing. And, you know, and I think, you know, I'm a writer. It's underlies everything that I've done, that I do. Again, that's why the newsletters, you know, I have a podcast, I put out some videos, but at the end of the day, like, you know, writing is sort of the key component of all my work. And I think that, and some of this is maybe my journalism background, but like to me, the whole point of writing is to be understood. And I think a lot of times people overlook that and they get caught up in writing to try to impress people, writing to try to convince people, to try to persuade people, to trick people, to whatever, right? All these things. But to me, it's very simple, right? Like my writing is very simple, very straightforward, very concise. And I'm always focused on the goal here is to have whatever message I'm trying to get across to have it be understood. And the best way to do that is usually to keep it as simple as possible, right? My favorite writing tip ever, because it works for every single person, every single time, no matter how good or bad a writer you are, is whenever you're done writing something, whether it's, a presentation, a proposal, a newsletter, a blog post, or whatever it is, right? You're done, you're about to hit publish, you're about to hit send, you're about to whatever, do a word count, and then force yourself to delete 10% or more of the words. Every single time, with every single person, in every single instance, it will always make whatever you've written stronger. And the reason is it's an editing trick, obviously, but what happens is when people write something and then they go through and edit it, where their mindset is at is they're looking for, as they analyze each bit of it, they go, is this making it stronger or not? Right? But when you shift to, you have to remove 10%. Now you're not saying, is this necessary or not? You're saying, what is the 10% that's least necessary, right? It's a total shift of your approach. And you wind up realizing that like, oh, well, if I have to remove words, I guess I'll remove this part. And all of a sudden at the end, you read it after you've removed this stuff and you're like, oh my God, I really didn't need that. This is so much better, right? It removes that feeling of like, but I really like this sentence. I have to remove something. Right. And so it's so simple. It works every time. And again, no matter how good or bad your writing is, and you'll be surprised, and a lot of times like I say at least 10%, but you could sometimes do 20%. You could sometimes do whatever. But you'll be amazed because you'll have something that you've edited a bunch of times. You think it's done and you're like, this is really tight. And then you go, all right, well, what would it look like if I had to remove 10%? And then you go, oh my God, it's better.
It's like the KonMari method to organizing your closet or your drawers, being like, I still like that t-shirt. Yeah, okay, well, we're getting rid of 10, 20%. I am really good with that when it comes to, I think, emails, threads, things of that nature, posts. Can always have room for improvement. Where I am a bit scared about doing it is the full book. I think that's going to, and that's why obviously you hire an editor and stuff like that, kind of remove yourself from the process a little bit because you're too close to it.
Yeah.
But I think that's where my next big test in that way will be. Curious side note, before we do the rapid fire questions, do you have a book that you've ever published that you have in the works? Are you going to write a book in the future?
I have not written a book. I've written the equivalent of probably multiple books. God only knows. I haven't. Every once in a while, I'd say every 6 months or so, it bubbles up, and I go, maybe I should write a book. I should probably write a book. I haven't done it for a couple reasons. I think one is, if I were going to do it, I'd have to have a really clear sort of idea, something I was really excited about and wanted to do that felt like it should be a book as opposed to a blog post, a something else, right? So that's the first thing. I don't think I've latched on to something that I felt like, oh, I need to do this. The second thing is, I feel like if I were to take something like that on, well, something else needs to go on pause. So I have to want to do it I have to want to do it more than things that I'm currently doing. So that hasn't happened yet either. Another thing is, in general, in most cases, a book is not a huge revenue generator, with rare exceptions. It's not a big revenue generator. So you're going to put all this time, or I would put all this time and effort into making this thing, which the true value of it is as a sort of attraction force. But my content kind of already does that. I have a lot of stuff out there, so I don't know, and I probably downplay it. It would probably be better for me than I realize, and maybe this is an excuse I tell myself so I don't have to do it. But that's that's definitely a piece of it. And, I don't really have interest. I've done a little speaking. I don't really want to go on the speaking circuit. A lot of times a book can be really, if I did, then I'd probably write a book. It'd be helpful. But yeah, so for the moment, no, but I definitely don't rule it out. And I do think about it occasionally, and would not surprise me if one of these days I do it. It just hasn't been a priority up to this point.
It were very similar that way because for 15 years, people always asking, why haven't you written a book? Why haven't you written a book? And the thing that I would always say is like, I don't want to write it for the sake of it being a business card. I need to have the right concept in my mind, how I'm going to weave stories together that tell a cohesive concept. And I think I'm there now. So that's why, over the last 6 months, I've been working on it. But yeah, I know obviously it goes without saying that if and when you feel that it's the right time, I'm sure it will be awesome for you. That's for sure.
I will say, if I were to do one, at least now, like where my head's at, if I were to do one, it would be super actionable. So like when I've thought about it, I've been like, what would it be like to write like the most actionable book ever written? Right. And it would probably be more along the lines of like a Derek Sivers book or a Seth Godin book, where it's a sort of collection of these short things. It would not be, I don't ever see myself doing a book where like I'm doing a bunch of research and telling stories about, this person, this study, they did blah, blah, like those kind of business books, which I read and I like. I don't see myself writing those books. I think with everything I do, I have an emphasis on sort of like no fluff, value per minute. And I think I would write a book in that way that was like, how can I just get right, whatever it is. I want people to be able to do something after reading it that they couldn't do before. And I want to get that to them in as sort of quick, no fluff way as possible. So if I did a book, that would be, at least that's my take at the moment, would be that would be the approach. I can't ever see myself writing like a, typical type business book, even though I read them.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I pictured when you were sharing that first bit because of how many blog posts you have. And it reminds me of like Jason Fried at 37 Signals as well.
Yep.
And how they've kind of written their books, just repurposing, but also like with some thoughtfulness, right? That's probably comes down to a table of contents and how you organize the ideas, because it still becomes a valuable book that stands alone as well. It's not just taking the blog posts and stapling them and shipping them. So that's awesome. Well, when it comes to rapid fire ones, these are always fun because it kind of has a through line through all the episodes. And the first one is just one thing that you yourself could be off topic from this stuff, but something that you are acutely learning right now.
I mean, it's weird to say it, but like I'm always, because I'm focused on how to help people get clients from content, I'm always learning how to do that better, both through other sources and through my own experimentation and doing things, right? So it's like, it's always on my mind, and I'm always experimenting. Oh, what happens if I do this? Or what happens if I do, package this way or mention this way? So that's a sort of constant thing for me that I'm focused on in a variety of different ways.
That's powerful in itself. Like Simone Biles is still learning cartwheels and Steph Curry is still learning how to shoot. So
yeah,
that's a great message. One piece of advice, I know that, as you said, you've written a lot of blog posts. You've certainly posted a lot on social media. You have a ton of great advice, but if you could only leave one thing for the next generation, what would it be?
I have this thing I say a lot, which I think is kind of universal advice. And it's that not enough people do things. They think about doing things, they talk about doing things, they make excuses for not doing things, they say they're going to do that, but they don't actually do things. And I think no matter what you want to succeed at, accomplish, whatever, it has to come from doing, right? And like, you can only learn so much without doing. And so like, I'm a big believer in like, just start the thing. Right. I've had conversations with people who are like forever, like planning, figuring out how to launch their newsletter. And I'm like, just write an email and press publish. like you'll figure out the rest. And I do this all the time, right? Like I've had products that I sold that I vaguely know what it's going to be and I'll figure it out as I go. Right. So, but I think I'm someone that is, things don't always work out. Right. Sometimes I do things, I think I'm going to like them. I don't like them. Whatever. But I think being that kind of person that does stuff, I have found that a lot of times people that are frustrated, unhappy, struggling, all of that, they're not actually doing much, right? And I think just starting to do things, whatever it is that you're thinking about, go do it. A small version of it, start it, whatever. So that would probably be my advice. Like, do more things.
I think that's why your skill sessions are so powerful, because they help people do that relatively quickly, And the last one is, if you were to ask me a question, you take the host mic for a sec, again, on these topics or otherwise, like, what's a question that comes to mind for me?
Let me see. I would say, well, here's a simple one that I like to ask people. What's the most surprising thing that you learned recently?
One of the most surprising things I learned would have to be that no matter how prepared you are as a parent for when kids head into the preteen and teen years, that it's going to bring a lot of the cliche, challenging times with supporting them through that phase in their life. I think for me, that's probably the most surprising thing that I've learned as it kind of relates to life, to connect to our overall like conversation in business and creator world. I think this whole concept has also forced me to decide not to give up many more times than I expected, even though the first person interviewed on episode 1 mentioned that, like, one of the keys to being a successful creator will be that you don't have to always love every single minute of it. You have to keep going, and I think that's another thing that, I was on a train yesterday for 4 hours doing some reflecting and writing and really thinking about like how many actual times I thought about giving up and kept going. Did probably surprise me a little bit. It's a good question.
Yeah. Good for you. Have you ever read the book, The Dip by Seth Godin?
What's interesting is either Ross Simmons or Tim Stoddard. I give them both a shout out. I did interviews with them last week. I can't remember which of the two, but they asked me that as well. And I was like, no, that's the one Seth Godin book I haven't read, I don't think.
That's so funny.
But I've read The Practice, and I think a lot of The Practice is recycling from The Dip. I've read The Icarus Deception.
Yeah.
I can't name a Seth Godin book I haven't read other than The Dip.
That's so funny. Yeah. It's a good short read, but it's about exactly what you were just talking about.
And he brings up The Dip in The Practice and in Icarus Deception. And so that's why I'm able to say I know the concept without faking it. But I think I should just go get that whole book too, because it sounds like it's one that people reference a lot. So for sure, it's worth it. And then if people go to support your content, look into becoming a client themselves, where should they go?
So fortheinterested.com/subscribe is my free newsletter. joshspector.com/clients is where they can learn more about how to work with me.
It's awesome. Well, I know time is money, and every time I interview someone who understands business and entrepreneurship, I'm extra appreciative that you took the time to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled, and I appreciate you reading my stuff and buying my stuff and all that. So it's great to come on and have a conversation with you.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks.